Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for a cash tag segment, and that's going to be Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at Likefolio. Megan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday is right. So we're talking Apple, big product release this week. No next big thing coming out of this one, no VR headset. But it seems like Apple's ecosystem continues to grow. I mean, are you guys seeing continued positive data? It seems like, they're gaining market share across the globe. They're not raising prices on their new phones, which I was really surprised about. But what kind of data are you guys seeing out of Apple after this product release?
Yeah, so, every year whenever Apple hosts this big keynote event, this is almost like Christmas for us at Likefolio. We've tested, and of all the days in the year, in terms of predictiveness, of a single date of predictiveness for Apple's performance over the next 6 to 9 months, it's this keynote event, because this is whenever they announce all the new products that are coming down the pipeline, and we get to see how the consumer response is, right? That initial consumer reaction to these new products. And as you mentioned, this drop wasn't necessarily anything revolutionary in the Apple universe. Apple is the bar is pretty high there when it comes to innovation. But at least from our perspective, we're breaking down, okay, they announced some new iPhones, they announced some new Apple Watches and some new AirPods. So we kind of segmented all of these different product lineups to gauge consumer reaction. So we'll jump in with the iPhone because this is the most significant contributor to Apple's bottom line, right? Whenever you break down their total revenue. And what you can see here is that the demand was up slightly versus last year. So you can see that on the date of that keynote release, these are the circled spikes that you see on this chart. Those mentions from consumers who are talking about, I'm going to buy one of these iPhones that they just announced, is up by about 6% year over year. But this is building on some strength. So whenever you look at that 30-day moving average, just overall in the last month, demand for Apple's iPhone has risen by about 44% year over year. And a lot of that is driven by people who are talking about, it's time to upgrade. Whenever we listen for mentions of people talking about, maybe I just want to upgrade my new phone, those mentions were higher on a year over year basis. And just in general, mentions of people who are talking about switching into the iPhone, so switching into Apple's ecosystem, those mentions are up by about 74% year over year. So I think this is just a nod to the brand security of Apple and what Apple has created with its iPhone. So while an increase of 6% year over year, that's not anything crazy. The overall trend and the overall flow of consumers either staying in Apple's ecosystem or getting into Apple's ecosystem is definitely a positive sign moving forward.
Megan, when you look at all the things that Apple did, what was there any one component that got more coverage than others, like maybe the price not going up, no price increase, the satellite function, the emergency services for satellite, was that anything important? Was the $800 new Apple Watch, it's called the Ultra, what got the most attention? Does your data break down specifically, or is it just they were looking at Apple products in general, or is it focused on the iPhone mainly? Is there any more granular data on what they were looking at? What made your numbers jump so much, if you could help us?
Yeah, so, just from a qualitative perspective of people talking about the iPhone, one thing that surprised me were people talking about that dynamic island feature that they announced. I think that was kind of a surprising thing that people really liked. That's just, a user experience boost. But the biggest takeaway from this entire event and kind of what we're calling it internally at Likefolio is that, 2022 looks like it's going to be the year of the watch for Apple. Of all of the different things that we broke down, we saw the biggest jump in consumer buzz, and just amount of buzz generated by the Apple Watch. And, they released, I think there's the Ultra, which is the higher end and kind of made for these outdoor explorers. You've got the Series 8, which is just, the upgrade to the regular watch. And then you've got the SE. And we actually broke down these watch mentions. So, we want to know which watch are people talking about the most, because that matters too, especially whenever you start breaking down the different price points for all of those different watches. And one thing that really surprised us is that 78% of the people who are talking about this Apple Watch and excited for this Apple Watch. We're talking about that Ultra version, which is the highest end of Apple's price point. I think it comes in around $799. So for us, that's really that's another really strong point for Apple, because I mean that's no joke. That used to be what phones cost, and now that's what people are buying for essentially a phone on their wrist. But we did see a lot of positive traction for just this Apple Watch brand in general. And another interesting nod is that the happiness levels for this drop on this date. Sometimes whenever you see when you see a big spike in mention volume like this, sometimes there can be some negativity associated, but actually consumer happiness increased 9 points yesterday for the Apple Watch brand. And we saw a lot of crossover and a lot of comparisons with Garmin, their Phoenix lineup. And when we looked at the sentiment levels, Garmin also spiked because people were comparing these two watches, and Garmin's watch sentiment dropped by 9% yesterday, or not yesterday, Wednesday, I guess I should say. And so it's really interesting to see that kind of split. And I think that that's something that Apple can check, that consumers are saying, hey, this is actually competitive now. Maybe potentially people who weren't Apple Watch users are considering being an Apple Watch user.
Yeah, and it seems like they're competitors in that space. I know other companies have tried to come out with, smart type technology watches, and they just really haven't grasped a hold. And even Apple's first couple iterations of the watch weren't that popular. Now, the price points on the watches are that $800 Ultra, all the way down to I think $250 or $299 maybe for the SE, which is the slimmed down model. Is that, when you look at that from maybe a stock perspective, right? The iPhone sales, they're expecting to be about the same as last year. They didn't raise the prices on those. But when you look at the iWatch, or the Apple Watch, is this a driver for revenue growth? It just doesn't seem like, maybe they'll sell a few more, but it seems like everybody in that Apple ecosystem's already in there that's buying the watch or maybe upgrading their watch.
I think that that's something that we'll definitely be tracking, especially into the holiday season. We've seen a lot of mentions from people who are talking about, this is a good gift option. And so that could be a nice little surprise driver for Apple, especially in the next few months. Another one of those gift options that we were tracking that we haven't talked about yet are the AirPods. We did see a higher demand volume. Obviously, this is a newer model release for this year versus last year, and similar theme of people saying, oh, this is a perfect gift for Christmas or gift for the holidays. So I think that Apple has two very giftable items, and especially with that watch coming in at that higher price point, that may be a surprise that some people aren't expecting.
Yeah, the AirPods definitely start spiking. I remember they didn't have any last Christmas, and I'll make my annual trip to the Apple Store in November also to load up on probably half of this stuff. All right, Megan, great stuff as always. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. You too.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at Likefolio, helping us break down the data on Apple.